Okay, so this kind of ties in with that. It still has to do with our responsibilities during closing and the things that we're supposed to have happen during our part of this cycle. Last week, as I said, we went over the life of an escrow along with countdown to closing. Today, we're going to go through the life of a loan a little bit and the paperwork that we're responsible for to make everything happen as this whole thing comes together. And so I'm gonna. All right, so notice on here it says life of a loan. It says applications, verifications, appraisals, repairs, and fingers crossed fundings. And this is kind of the way this is supposed to happen. So I will preface it by saying that every contract that you're involved in, and you will be involved in many in your career. That's a promise. If you work at it and things, you'll be involved in many. And in all of the transactions you'll be involved in, it would be nice if it were actually if we actually flowed the way that I talk about during these meetings and things, because almost always something comes into play and you have to react a little bit differently. I can't give you all of those answers. We can talk about some of them, but I want you to understand that there's a process. We're responsible for part of it. And if we drop our ball, then all of a sudden it becomes very difficult for everybody else who's involved. So we're going to kind of go at it from that end. We're going to start out by talking about, I'm going to go through this, and this will be a little bit of redundancy, although we're going to spend more time on different areas today than we did last week. Last week, we emphasized areas that had to do with escrow. This week, we're going to emphasize things that have to do with the property and the loans and things like that. So hopefully that one, and the other thing I have to tell you is that I loaded some extra forms in here. Not that we don't have enough forms already that we have to deal with and things, but when we hit some of these spots that we're responsible for, we're going to take just a little bit longer to talk about them than others, as they have to do with the loan and the processing of everything. So it all starts out the same place that we started when we were talking about it last week. And for those of you that weren't on it last week, this will all be new to you, so I will spend a little time on it. But this all starts out with an executed offer. And an executed offer obviously is the residential purchase agreement or vacant land purchase agreement or whatever it happens to be. It all starts out with an executed offer. And executed, for those of you that may not know what that means that everybody that is supposed to sign to make it a contract has done that. One signature, if it needs two, is not sufficient. No signatures doesn't mean anything. If you only have one side signatures, it doesn't mean anything. It's not a contract until everybody fulfills their signature responsibilities. In addition to an executed RPA, residential purchase agreement, if there are counteroffers involved, they need to be signed by all parties. Not just a counter and with something sent out that says we'll take it at this price instead. It needs to be talked about, negotiated, and signed by everybody. If there are any addendums, those need to be signed and put in place. And those will come up. Addendums are the kind of thing where we clean things up. So if somebody wrote an offer, for instance, and maybe they put the wrong address in, or it's off by one digit or something, then maybe we have an addendum that cleans that up a little bit. Maybe they didn't put the people's name in there right. Rather than rewriting an entire contract, you might clean it up with an addendum. So there are different things you do with addendums. And then, of course, contingencies, and that would be like the contingency for the sale of another property, or for which is the COP, we call it, contingency for purchase. And then we have the SPRP, which is seller's purchase of replacement property. So I want to sell, but I can't until I sell my property. So we have contingencies that are written in there. When we download the RPA, Residential Purchase Agreement, it also downloads with agency. That's the agency relationship that we are dealing with, and the way we deal with agency. You have a couple of different options, either you're representing a seller, or you're representing a buyer, or you're representing both the buyer and the seller. Yay, we like representing both the buyer and the seller, not just because you get a little extra check, but because I have a lot of extra control. And if I need something signed, I know who to call to get it done. And so it really puts a lot of the responsibility, but it also puts a lot of the control in the hands of the agent that's writing it. And one thing I'll emphasize, and this is based on what our compliance department has talked to me about recently, is that some people don't seem to understand dual agency. And so let me just say that dual agency is when an agent with the same company represents both sides. So let me repeat that just a little. It's not just the agent that's representing both sides, it is the office that's representing both sides. And so if you think about the way it's written on the contract, it says that the selling agency is Century 21 Masters by Terry Ryan. And then it might have the other agent is Coldwell Banker by Jenny Waters, or whatever it happens to be. So that is not dual agency. If, however, somebody inside Century 21 Masters lists the property and another person within Century 21 Masters sells the property, that is still a dual agent. Because if you remember the way the contracts are written, it always has the agent is Century 21 Masters, and then it's by Terry Ryan or whoever it happens to be by you. And so Century 21 Masters, if they're involved in both sides of the transaction, it is a dual agency situation, and everybody needs to understand that. All right, so we have all of those things signed, everything is initialed, everything is put in place the way it should be. And check and verify all of those initials and things. There are hidden boxes in that contract that I don't know, I think they all ought to be highlighted or something, but there are hidden boxes there that sometimes we overlook an initial or something. Any missing part, actually, if somebody wanted to pursue it in court or pursue it legally somehow or another, anything that is not completely initialed and signed in all places that it's supposed to be initialed and signed, and by all parties that are supposed to be signing it, creates an invalid contract. So be sure you check for all of those places. Okay, day one, we open with a TC if we're going to use a TC, or we take care of it ourselves, but one way or the other, we open escrow. And that's generally handled by just, if you use one of our in-house escrows where there's one working in the office that you work out of, you can just hand carry it into the other room. If not, you scan it to them, just send a copy of the contract, make sure it's the full contract. It creates issues right off the bat if we're only getting part of it in there. If we're trying to follow up later with something, if they're looking for something that is addressed in the contract but they don't have the paperwork for it. So make sure that they get everything they need and get escrow opened. Hopefully you'll open escrow with 21st Century Escrow and or our independent Diamond Valley or something. At least we're trying to keep it in-house. And again, let me say that, I mean, obviously money is always an issue and things, but I will tell you that you will find the longer you're in real estate, the more control you have over the situation, the smoother things are going to go. And so if you're using an in-house escrow where you can just walk next door and knock on the door, or you can see them in the hall and see them in the lunchroom or anything else, obviously it lends itself to a little bit easier time of keeping track of what's going on. Okay, disposition of EMD. That EMD is earnest money deposit. And let me explain that earnest money deposit. In the contract, it calls for it to be wire transfer to escrow. Between day 1 and 3, actually, it's within 3 days of signing. So when everybody signs it, and that's the execution, so everybody signed it. Within 3 days of actually having a contract, the money is supposed to go into escrow. On the contract itself, it says by wire transfer. If by chance you're gonna do a cashier's check or something else, then those things could be, there's little check boxes on the contract that identifies those, how it's going to be paid. But understand that escrow, this escrow is actually, it's a working appendage of us. It says right on the top of the residential purchase agreement, it says residential purchase agreement and joint escrow instruction. So that means that escrow is going to do whatever the contract says. And if it says that the earnest money is to be in within 3 days and it's not in, that is gonna delay them getting the opening paperwork and getting everything ordered that they're supposed to. It's going to delay them. So make sure that everybody understands that, okay, so now we have, today's Monday, so we have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, so sometime Wednesday or first thing, because wire transfers are funny sometimes. They, depending on what time you do it in the day, it changes the time that it's delivered to actually the escrow company's bank and things. So there might be a little bit of a delay, but certainly if we opened an escrow today, no later than Thursday, escrow should have the money in place. That will trigger the escrow to move forward and order the prelims and start the whole process of trying to find out who they owe money to and everything else. But while we're talking about earnest money deposit, I'm going to talk about one other little thing. And this is going to be one of my flipping around to a different page here. So close your eyes if spinning papers make you, gives you vertigo or anything like that. But otherwise, the earnest money deposit, that's a deposit. We call it a deposit. Everybody refers to it as a deposit. It even says in the contract, it talks about a deposit and getting a deposit back and everything. And people want to know, people being a seller specifically, or maybe a seller's agent that doesn't have answers and things. If the deal doesn't close, if it falls apart, if there are things that happen during there that causes it not to move all the way to completion, then who gets the deposit? Does the buyer get the deposit back? Does the seller get to keep it? Does the seller get to keep part of it? Do they split it and all that kind of stuff? All those things are possible. I want to tell you that the contingency times that you write on the contract, or that are actually defaulted to like 7 days or 17 days or anything else, those do a lot to determining what happens to a deposit if a deal falls apart. If you have a conventional loan or you have cash deal or something, and somebody has a deposit in there, and during the 17-day contingency period or a 14-day or a 7-day or whatever you have written on the contract as contingency periods for investigations and things, if those things are all fulfilled in that 17 days, then the seller will return the deposit. Actually, they don't have it, it's in escrow, but they will return it to the buyer. If there are things that, if we go beyond the 17 days without having some kind of an extension of time, and that 17 days is in effect, and we send out a contingency removal to have all contingencies removed, again, after the contingency period, then the potential for the seller to retain some of it, or maybe all of it, depending on what the situation is. As long as they've exceeded the contingency periods. If they haven't exceeded the contingency periods, then the bottom line is that you, as a seller, gave them X amount of time to complete these things. In that time frame, that didn't happen, then they should be entitled to their deposit back. Now, if the contract asks for things to be done to the property, fix this, replace that, do whatever, and there's money out of pocket to somebody, then depending again on the timing, and that timing is important, that's why we push to get contingency removals when things are done. But that timing is important. So that was talking about conventional loans and cash deals and things like that. Let's talk about FHA and VA. If you have an FHA or a VA offer, then you'll either include it in the offer itself, because as soon as you check the little box that says FHA or VA or something, then this form will automatically be downloaded to your the pages in your contracts. But notice what it says on here, and I highlighted it so that everybody can read it and understand it. It is expressly agreed that notwithstanding any other provisions of this contract, okay, so how do we make provisions to a contract? We do it in writing and things. But notwithstanding any other provisions, the purchaser shall not be obligated to complete the purchase of the property described herein, or to incur any penalty or forfeiture of earnest money deposits, or otherwise unless purchaser has been given, in accordance with HUD and FHA or VA requirements, a written statement by the Federal Housing Commissioner or the Department of Foreign Affairs or a direct endorsement lender setting forth an appraised value of the property of not less than 650, this is probably supposed to be 650,000, but so you might want to change that on yours. But so we'll just, and that 650,000, that's not a magic number. The number that you want to have put in this place is the purchase price that you're offering on the property. If you're offering 650,000, then you want to put in 650,000. If you're offering 800,000, then that number needs to be 800,000. You don't want the property to appraise for less than the value that you put in there. So whatever that value is, if you have a paper in front of you, cross through it and put in whatever value that is. But when this comes out, whatever purchase price you have, that's the number that needs to go in here. And then the purchaser, if you read after that, shall have the privilege and option of proceeding with consummation of the contract without regard to the amount of appraised valuation. So the appraised valuation is arrived at to determine the maximum mortgage the Department of Housing will guarantee. So whether it's HUD or VA or whatever it is, or FHA or anything, you want that number to be what your purchase price is. So I hope that makes sense to you. We're not buying a property for $650. I'll bet you all of you could buy that property today. So it's whatever the property purchase price is. You want it to appraise at that value if you're dealing with FHA or HUD. So hopefully that makes sense. Anybody have any hand raises or anything else? And so notice what it says right here, and we already read over it, but I'll just repeat it here. And the buyer or the purchaser in this case will not incur any penalty by forfeiture of earnest money deposits if it appraises, or if it doesn't appraise for the value that you put in that little box. So on an FHA or a VA, you're going to have a real hard time from a seller standpoint keeping any kind of a deposit. And understand that sometimes the deposit, when you do a cancellation, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes, but when you do a cancellation. Usually the buyer that's canceling, they ask for a return of the deposit. And it's broken into two different sections because the cancellation of the contract and the return of the deposit are not something that has to happen simultaneously. If somebody wants to cancel the deal, but they want to negotiate part of the deposit, then they don't have to sign the second part. The deal is still canceled, but the deposit has not been resolved. So don't make promises on the deposit. That's the easiest thing to do. Let people know that the deposit is an earnest money to show that you have skin in the game, so that you want to buy the property. The better the earnest deposit, the better it looks against other offers. And so there's some value in there. And if there are things that have been done per contract, and then a deal falls apart really late in the transaction, then a deposit can be fought for. All right, so let me go back here to the countdown to closing. I'm sorry we took a lot of time on deposit, but we always have questions about that. And when I say always, I'm literally every week we have one or two issues about deposits and things. This morning when I was driving to Canyon Lake, that's where I am right now. So I was driving to Canyon Lake and I got a phone call about a cancellation over the weekend. And part of what came up was deposits. So good timing. So let's talk about the next step. As an agent, we need to order the NHD, and that is the listing agent that takes care of ordering that. Pay attention to what the contract says, because the buyer's agent may ask for a specific NHD, or there are several of them out there. They're property ID and they're, anyway, I'm not even gonna go through the list. There's a bunch of them out there. And so make sure on the contract that if it doesn't have anything written in there, then you are free to choose. If it has something written in there that your seller agreed to, then by all means, order it from that place. If you've already ordered it ahead of time, you can make a call to the agent, and if you wanted, and if they were okay with it, you could make an addendum so that it got paid to the right place. But whatever it says in there, order it from there. Now, the NHD, the part that we care about, and I'm gonna scroll again, sorry. You'd think that somebody of my advanced technological skills could figure out how to have both these papers side by side, but I haven't figured that out yet, so. All right, so here is the most important thing. Now this thing, you see here, it says page 2. The first page is gonna be a cover letter that just says who my NHD in this case is. But the important things are the report date. So don't have one that's too old, not that things will probably change, but if you have one that's a year or two ago, it's probably not gonna hold up in somebody's eyes. But make sure that we're talking about the right address. Because everybody can make a mistake. Maybe when I was ordering it, I ordered it online and maybe I hit 4225 instead of 4425 or whatever the case may be. So double check it and make sure those things are in place. And then the next thing I want to do is I want to drop down here, and this basically is a summary page. And it has 20 or 25 pages behind it to explain all of these things in further detail. But in this case, it's a summary page. And it says that is it in a special flood hazard area? And it says type zone, zone type A or V. And if you go to the other pages that they put in here, it will explain to you that a zone A would be maybe a high flood zone, or maybe it would happen every 100 years or whatever V is. Anyway, it'll explain that in the subsequent pages. Or is it an area of potential flooding? Now, we have a lot of areas around Southern California for sure. We have a lot of reservoirs that are kind of they're like above ground reservoirs, right? We don't have all of the deep canyons that you can put a reservoir in or something, but for instance, when I look around. When I look around here, we have in Corona, we've got a reservoir over there just right off the freeway and things. Well, do you think if that dam broke, it would be in some kind of an inundation area? Do you think there's a potential for flooding over there? If that reservoir went down, well, then that would have to be identified. So when it's identified, it's talking about, is it in some kind of a inundation area? If there was a flood, if the dam broke, if the dam overflowed, are there houses and developed areas and things that would be subject to flooding? And that's what it's talking about when it says potential flooding. Okay, here's one that we get talked about all the time right now, especially during fire season and things, but is it in an area? Is it a high or very high fire hazard severity zone? And this one is not, so that's a yay. And then asks over here, it says, is it a state responsibility area? Or is a high state area or a very high local area? So there's three different distinctions here. It maybe isn't a big deal as far as the state goes, but maybe there's a local park right in the middle of things. That if there's any issues there, that might come out as a yes. So there are areas of high fire and very high fire. And what this triggers is that form that everybody gets confused about and things, and that's the one that's talking about defensible space and or home fire hardening and things. So, but we'll go through those later, but I just want to explain that this is where that information comes from. So it's important that you go over this, review it and find out. Notice here, there's, at least on this house, there's no map yet released by the state to determine whether or not this is in a high liquefaction area. Liquefaction, you probably know, but liquefaction is based on areas that are near earthquake fault zones that might be mostly sand or something rather than granite or rather than some other kind of sand or sandstone, something that if it shook too much, there could be some movement in the house. And the landslide areas, of course, we have the landslide areas that we don't have very many of them here, but we have had some over along the coast. We hear anytime there's heavy rains after fires and things, we hear about landslides on Pacific Coast Highway and things up around Malibu and things like that. So if you're selling in areas there, if this would come up, and it would probably say yes, 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 all of these yeses, which is a totally different thing. Everybody signs off on this. This is signed by the sellers. This is signed by the agent. And it would be signed by the buyers as we move through escrow. Those are all things that are going to require all the signatures that you can get on there. So that is the NHD. Let's go back here again. Wood pest inspection. All right, wood pest inspection is not required on all deals. However, if you're going to want a and wood pest, just so that you know, that's we give everything nicknames, right? Well, anyway, wood pest inspection we call termite. And then somebody will say, well, it doesn't say that there's any termites in the house, but there's dry rot. Okay, so now there's wood pest, either damage as a result of termites or a result of some kind of a wood destroying pest or a fungus or something like that. So that's why it's a wood pest inspection instead of a termite inspection. However, you hear a lot of people refer to it as termite inspection. So this is a wood pest inspection. You're going to order that within the first couple of days. And the reason you want to order that within the first couple of days is because from a seller standpoint, you have 7 days to have all the reports done that are needed by the contract. And a termite, if they put it in the contract, the termite, that's the way they'll write it, but the wood pest inspection is going to be one of those things. So let's drop down here just for a minute. Sorry about the up and down, like I say. I'm not clever enough to put them side by side. So here is an inspection report. All right, this is it's a complete report. And it talks about the property in general. And you should always have this acknowledged by buyers and sellers so that there's never any doubt that everybody got it and that we know what we're talking about. But in this particular house, the house is clear. That's what this shows. And the garage is clear. That's what this shows. However, they do have a soffitted wood patio. So what they're referring to here is that is this wood across here and a little bit here on the corner has termites. And so obviously they could get into the rest of the house, so it's something that needs to be taken care of. When you go through the report, it will talk about the possible ways of treating it and things, and it gives you the entire report. It's about 5 or 6 pages. And it comes down here and it says, these are the findings and the recommendations. Cut out damaged timber and replace as necessary. Treat with registered chemical. Now what that chemical is something that's supposed to keep them from coming back, so to speak. So anyway, it goes through each of those numbers that it had on that other page, and it talks about what they should do to that. It also gives them a total amount. This is what it's going to cost to get those repairs taken care of. $1,475. So if indeed we have to do we have to do termite work as well as give a report, this is what it's going to cost somebody. Can that be negotiated? It can. It can be negotiated into the contract originally. If you were to write that you want a termite report and clearance, then this is what's going to be required for a clearance. If you want a section 1 clearance, that's going to be wood pests that are currently infesting. They've infestated. They're there. You can see them running around. Maybe you can't, but somebody can see them running around, or they can see their tunnels, or they can see their. I should have a bunch of 2x4s with termites and stuff in it that you can see them running around, but that probably wouldn't be too good for the Canyon Lake office. So anyway, section 2 is more a preventative type thing, and that is that the termite people, while they're looking around, they say, oh yeah, but this post that has termites in it right now goes all the way down in the ground, and it is nailed to the house. So it's actually affixed to the house. That is a potential for termites in the future. Maybe they don't exist today, but it's a potential for them in the future if all this isn't treated. Maybe you have a 2-story house and there's some standing, not standing water, but maybe they see a crack in a shower pan, for instance. And so that might be a section 2 item. If you don't get this crack fixed in this shower pan, there's a potential for water to leak into the wood that is the floor of the bathroom upstairs, but it's the ceiling of the dining room downstairs. And so that becomes a section 2 item because I didn't see any termites or anything else there today. However, that's something that if you don't take care of it down the road, you're going to have issues. So that's what a termite or wood pest inspection looks like. And we like the ones that don't have any of these things, and it has a little thing across it here that says cleared or clearance. And that means that they didn't find anything anywhere, and it's a clearance in their eyes. All right, let's go back. Wow, we have to go back further every time, don't we? Okay, so by then you're going to get your escrow instructions because they've gotten the deposit and things. They've also started the loan application process. And they started that a little bit more than likely when they first talked with the lender. Because they filled out some kind of a 1 page or 2 page application that basically said, I will make this much money and here's how long I've worked there and here's the name of the company and here's where we live now and those kind, and it says a very basic idea of the people that are applying for a loan. However, that loan application process is just taking off at that point, because from there, we have to go through this whole little process. I'm gonna scroll down again. Guess I could have just stayed there, huh? But this, you can't see it at all. There's just a little chart that I threw in there so that you kind of knew, because I think that it's important that you know these things for a lot of reasons. For one, the agent is the person that everybody, seller or buyer, comes to find out. They don't call the termite people themselves. They don't call the loan people themselves. They don't call these things. So I think that it's important that you have a general idea of what happens so that you can speed up your side. So here's just a little life cycle, if you would, of a loan origination. All right, so we start up here with the application and submission. And the application is just what I said a minute ago. That's gonna include all of the just basic things that the buyer can think of that they can write down and maybe give addresses or phone numbers or whatever when they're talking about where they worked and why and how long and that kind of thing. So we have that little chart that does that, shows you that that is step one. Hopefully from there, you'll get your pre-qualification letter to be able to go out and purchase a house, and they'll give you a price at that point in time. They qualify for $650,000 or whatever that number happens to be. So that application is started. And that during that application thing, that's basically just that could be over the phone, that could be a sit down, that could be a who knows what it is, but they just give them basics. So step two now is in the hands of the lender, whoever that officer was that you opened everything with, to start the information verification. Because what I write on a piece of paper can be totally different than, and maybe not totally different, but somewhat different from what I've said. Somebody says, how long did you work here? Oh, I don't know, 4 years. Well, they might find out that it's actually 2 years and 2 months. Now, maybe that won't affect the loan, maybe it will, depending on what the amounts are. If you haven't worked for someplace for a year or two, that could affect the loan. If you haven't, if you've changed jobs several times, if it's been an improvement cycle to where the lender can look at it and say, oh, well, you know what, he quit this company, but he went to this company doing similar things, or it's a similar company at an advanced pay rate or at a different capacity or something, but anyway, they will do all of the verification. They have a VOE, it's called verification of employment. And that's exactly what they do, is they send out whatever company you told me you worked for. They're looking for verification from the company. Additional verification is going to be that I told them that I made $100,000. All right, if I made $100,000, they want to verify where that, if that $100,000 is accurate. So how do they verify that? Well, one thing might be to bring in the last 2 years worth of tax forms. It may be bring in some bank statements for the last 6 months. It may be bring in a paycheck stub to show me that you're still working there, because I could have a tax form that showed that I made $100,000 last year. But maybe this year they let me go and I'm not actually working anymore. So I don't have any recent paychecks, but I did make that much last year. So that whole process, that's a information gathering and basically verification of the things that I've been told as a lender. Okay, so once all that is put together. And an appraisal is done, that's part of the information gathering, and that won't come from a buyer, that'll come from an appraiser. But during this process of information verification, they will have an appraisal done on the property. The appraisal will then come in, and the appraisal, along with the loan application, along with all of the verifications of incomes and outgoes and all those kind of things. I know how much your car payment is, and I know how much you make, because all those things have been verified. Then all of that is put into a package and sent to underwriting. So that's actually a third eye at this, or a third set of eyes. You had one that you sat down with, and they'll get referred to as lenders and things, but they're actually originating the loan. The person that you sit down with originally, and they'll get the basic information, and they give it to the department that takes care of all the verification. And once all that's done, then it goes to underwriting. And underwriting takes a look at all of the things that you put in there, all of the paperwork. Or I'm sure it's online, I'm sure that you uploaded it and things, and so it's online somewhere. So they go through and they take care of all of that. And underwriting looks at it and they said, okay, this is the type of loan that you are trying to get. Be it FHA or VA or conventional or needs a second or whatever. And they look at that loan and they look at all of the information that they've gathered. And they make a determination as to whether or not these people qualify for the type of loan that they're trying to get for this house. And underwriting is kind of the final seal of approval, sort of. Because at that point in time, they are either going to approve the loan or deny it. And if they deny it, they will give you some reasons. Well, the reason is that you have your debt to income ratio is too high. You bought this new car not too long ago, your payment on it's $700, and that changes your debt to income ratios considerably. Those things change. You missed some payments. Oh my gosh. See, they run a credit check when they first start this origination thing. They also run a credit check before they get ready to fund a loan, because they want to make sure that all of those payments that you said you were making and that the first credit report said was good, it is still good. Well, you know what? We had to save money for a down payment, so we haven't made our last 2 car payments. And I didn't make my last master, I made the minimum on my last master charge payment. Well, all of those kind of things change your credit numbers, the magic number that you're trying to hit. And where do those magic numbers go, and why do you need them? Well, the magic numbers are helping to determine the type of loan you're gonna get. You know, like if you have something in the 600 range, then you're probably going to be getting an FHA loan. Generally, there's been some things in your past that have driven your credit down, but maybe you've straightened it out for the last 12 months or 15 months or whatever, and now you're making your payments, but this past kind of hangs with you a little bit. So they're looking at that and trying to see what goes on and what percentage rates, or if there's going to be more down payment needed, or whether you can get the loan at all. And so you get an approval or a denial at that point in time. Once you get it, and let's go on the good side. Let's say you get the approval, because we all know what the denial means. The denial means that they're not going to give you the money. So you have a couple of options as a buyer. One is to find out what you need. Well, I need a bigger down payment. Okay, well, let me talk to the bank of dad and see if that works. And so maybe there's another way for them to come up with some things, but approval or denial will happen. If they approve it, then the next thing that's going to happen is that they're going to get a CD, it's called, and basically it's like a closing disclosure for the lender, And it is it's basically a disclosure of how much money you're borrowing, what your deferred payment price is gonna be. How much your payment is gonna be, how much your interest is gonna be. How much of it is going to impounds to take care of insurance, how much of it is going to impounds to take care of your taxes. All of those things are going to be put in this CD. And that CD has to go out and be signed by the buyer 3 days prior to them being able to sign loan docs. Now, loan docs is just a big stack of paper that needs to be signed in front of a notary. Or a notary has to be involved in it somehow because it requires notarization. And the loan docs can be done maybe in the lender's office, it might be in the escrow office, it might be at home. There are mobile notaries that can go to a home to take care of those things. But the loan docs have to be signed in front of a notary. The notary goes through the paperwork, they make sure all of the signatures are signed where they're supposed to be and initials are all initialed where they're supposed to be. And at the end, they take their thumbprints and driver's license information and put all that stuff together and they send it back to escrow. And then it goes back to escrow and escrow bundles it all along with their paperwork that they needed to have with them. And then they send it all back to the lender. Once the lender gets all that stuff, they review it again. So this, all of this paperwork gets reviewed and reviewed and reviewed and reviewed. And so, and sometimes what'll be frustrating to you is the first reviewing party maybe didn't catch something, but the second one did. So it took you an extra 5 days to find out that there was an issue. Those things happen. I'm just telling you right now that those things will happen. They'll happen at different times, at different dates. That's why the contingency dates that are on the contract are important to you. So they sign the loan docs go back to escrow bundles along with their paperwork, everything goes back to the lender. The lender looks at it one more time to make sure that they have everything in place to fund this loan. And when they decide to fund the loan, then it'll be set up for funding and they will fund the loan. The money goes to the title company. The title company uses it to pay off, uses whatever's in there out of the loan to pay off any liens or anything else against the property, including mortgage payoffs and things. And they'll pay off whatever they need to pay off to clear a title. And once they have paid off all of that, then what they wire transfer money to escrow. And the title company goes to the county with everything all paid off and everything else and says, we're ready to record this. And then the county records it. And then you actually have closed a deal. The loan closes at that point. As soon as they fund, they've closed it. I have seen in my life a couple of times, not often, thank goodness, but I have seen a couple of times in my life where the lender came across some information at the last minute that caused them to pull funding. But most of the time, by the time you get to this point, your loan will fund and the title company will get their money and everybody will get paid off. And escrow will get their money for disbursement for commissions and paid off the wood pest guys and everything else. And that's kind of the cycle of a loan. Does that kind of make sense to you? Is there any questions about that? No, we're all good? Or we have our TV on, we're watching Days of Our Lives. I know, I get it. Okay. Let's go way back up here. And talk about, so we've gone through the loan application, we've gone through the appraisal. The escrow instructions, it's important to review those and make sure that they read the same way that your contract read. There's been many times in my life where I've caught escrow errors and maybe it's an error on their part and maybe it was something I told them wrong or maybe they couldn't read part of my writing or whatever it happened to be. But there are things that can happen. And within the first week, you're gonna get escrow instructions to review and things. You get your commission instructions signed by Randy. And you just email it to him and he'll take care of that. He looks at it, he knows how much money you're making and. And he can look and see that you're not giving away your life. And some of the company money too, so. The other thing we need is in the first 7 days, we need to get disclosures out to everybody, and I didn't put copies of all the disclosures in here, but we've talked about them in the past. The TDS, transfer disclosure statement, you either have a transfer disclosure statement. Or you have an ESD, which is an exempt seller disclosure. Which is for like a bank or a probate or maybe a successor trustee, or maybe you're an executor for an estate, maybe you're representing a corporation. Somebody who hasn't lived in the house. And they are not required to know what's wrong with the house if they're not living there. Now, the exception to that is, just so that nobody gets confused, is that if you are a landlord, the fact that you haven't lived in a house does not remove you from the responsibility to know what's wrong with the house. Usually, if the tenants are paying on time, you know exactly what's wrong with the house. When the tenants quit paying and you have to go through an eviction, then you might have to, but now it's your responsibility to go into the house and see what they left. So as a landlord, you are still responsible for a TDS and an SPQ. But if you're representing one of those other things and have never lived in the house, then you can do the ESD, and that relieves you of the responsibility to do the TDS or the SPQ, seller property questionnaire, or transfer disclosure statement. The PDR, we already talked about that, that's a property disclosure report. There might be a WSPI, which is a well, septic, propane, and identifying property boundaries. So if there's a well on the property, if there's a septic system on the property, if there's propane tanks, if it's a big property and goes up onto the hill and everything else, then you may end up having to have a survey done or something. In that case, that would go in. The SBSA, that's the seller buyer statement. Excuse me. It is talking about what things that the buyer can check into and what things the seller has to let them check into. And you have your AVID, which is your agent's visual. And that's the inspection that you as an agent do every time you list or sell a property. Okay, that's a non-negotiable item for Century 21 Masters. There are companies out there, smaller companies usually, because all of the large companies seem to use that or something similar to it. But there are companies out there that says, no, our broker doesn't require an AVID. Well, it is not required by contract. However, it is required by Century 21 Masters. So if you're involved on either side of a transaction, you need to do an AVID. But the other guy might not have to because his broker doesn't require it. Lead paint, if the house is older than 1978, then we have the lead paint. And fair housing, we have fair housing all the time, and that's, that's never different. We don't discriminate for all of those things that you can discriminate for. And any other reports or inspections that already exist. And what that kind of means is that as a seller, if I have I'll say for instance, I had some termite work done. Say for instance, I had a last rainy season, I had a roof leak or two, and so I called a roofer and they came out and then they gave me a report and they went and repaired it and things like that. Those things that I already have that's happened within the last little while, not something that I repaired years ago or anything, but if it's things that I've had happen within the last 30, 40, 50 days or something, then those reports should be given to somebody. If I have a home inspection, because maybe I did one on my own to see what was wrong with the house, or maybe I already had it in escrow and they gave me a copy of the home inspection report and it showed all these things that are wrong. Well, now as a seller, I know that. And as a seller's agent, I know that. And so because I know it, I am to disclose it. Okay? Then we're pushing to get our contractual things taken care of, our contractual contingencies. With investigations. So a buyer or buyer's agent can complete anything they want to. They can order it. They can ask for it in a contract, but it's up to them to do them all within 17 days. Those things are to be done within 17 days. By the time you hit that point, the appraisal should be in hand. And so now we have all of our contingencies taken care of, all the way up to the appraisal in hand, which should lead to a loan approval or a denial within the next few days. Understand that all of these 17 days things that we can take care of, those are all calendar days. When we're dealing with the loan, we're dealing with business days because the lender may not be open on a Saturday or Sunday or something. So we're dealing with different days then, if that makes sense to you. All right, so we have all these things done. There should be a request for repairs. I'm gonna zing back here again. Whoa. I zinged right past. Okay, there we are. Request for repair, number 1. So here's the date it was prepared. You can tell what I was doing with part of my Sunday. Date prepared 4/6. So in accordance with the terms and conditions of the purchase agreement, dated such and such. The property address, the name of the buyer and the name of the seller are on there. Buyer requests that seller, prior to verification of condition, repair or take the other specified action on each item listed below, or on the attached list dated such and such. So yes, you could have an attached list. I have seen people that have done, they've taken their home inspection report and they've just taken the home inspection report and shot it off just the way it was and said we want all these things taken care of. And sellers sometimes look at that and just say, well, they're crazy, I'm not doing anything. Whatever the case may be, remember that it's between the seller and the buyer. It's up to us to help them negotiate it, but it's not up to us to try to just make sure that we get paid. Notice on the top here, and I highlighted it, the whole little sentence. Seller has no obligation to respond to the buyer request. Now that is true. By law, this is not contractual. A repair request is not contractual. It is a contract outside of a contract. It's one of its own. And the seller has no obligation to respond. However, that being said, I would recommend that you respond in some way or another, and we're gonna go through those right now. And that is by a request that you take care of these things, replace inoperable GFCI, working carbon monoxide, repair or replace exhaust fan range. Okay, so these are things that are not working that are of concern to the seller, and there may be others, who knows what it is. But they've asked the seller to take care of these things, or and in this case, they ask the seller to pay for section 1 work in the termite report that you gave me. You gave me a termite report, it showed that there was some section 1 stuff that needed to be done. We would like to have that taken care of, and so you put those things in there. Or, this is the or, this was the this and this is the or. Or buyer requests that seller credit buyer $5,000 at close of escrow, or $2,000 at close of escrow. And notice that it says on here, note, any credit included in this paragraph is separate from and shall not reduce or supersede any other credit in the agreement. So any credit that we're already giving them, maybe we're giving them $10,000 towards buyer's closing costs or something like that. So none of that changes. All right, that's all the same. And This is in addition to that. We've asked for a credit of this, or. Buyer requests that seller modify the purchase price. So the purchase price was $650,000. And maybe since there's so much stuff that has to be taken care of, and of course, this little list that I put on here was just for expedience of an example. It's not a list that's much of a price. But you could modify the purchase price if there's a lot of things that needed to be done. Maybe there's some roof issues, maybe there's some HVAC issues, maybe there's some other issues that need to be taken care of, and so. We want to reduce the purchase price by X amount of dollars. Now, why would you reduce the purchase price? I mean. If you were a cash buyer, then to reduce the purchase price cash is coming out of your pocket anyway. So if I have to come out with $5,000 less in order to take care of $5,000 worth of costs, that makes sense. Modifying a purchase price also creates a little bit less of a dollar amount on a tax base. So they may want to go that way. So these are things that they're asking for. And attach and anytime you ask for work to be done, it is a good idea to attach the report, whatever it happens to be. You might have maybe the termite report that they would already have a copy of, but maybe on your home inspection report, you have 3 or 4 items in there that you're asking for them to take care of. Include a copy of the report so that they can see that it really is something that needs to be done. Then the third thing is FHA or VA. Now, FHA or VA, we already talked about that a little bit when we had the loan itself, the loan cycle and things. But when you have an FHA or VA, the lender may require actions to be taken care of. The appraisal goes out and they said, yes, we'll do $650,000 worth of value with these adjustments. And then they'll have some things, maybe. Who knows what it's gonna be? Maybe flooring is all beat up and everything in the living room or in the bedrooms. Maybe the carpets are all torn. Maybe there's doors that are missing. Maybe there's water heaters, like who knows? But if there's things that need to be done, then the buyer's FHA or VA lender requires the following items to be repaired and requests the seller repair them. And you write those items in here. So these are maybe in addition to that we have written up above. Maybe it's other things the lender saw that we didn't feel were important, but the appraiser saw it and he feels like it's important. And if he feels like it's important, he's gonna base the value of the loan on what he thinks needs to be done. We do still have the opportunity to pay for them ourselves as a buyer. If the seller says, well, I'm just broke, this is taking all my money to get this thing done, and I don't have the money to do any of those repairs. We do have the opportunity to check this little box that says the buyer can take care of the repairs and write those in here. Of course, if we do that, we need an addendum signed by both the buyer and the seller that says that the seller and buyer agree that buyer will take care of necessary repairs and seller hereby gives buyer access to the property at on such and such days or for such and such a week or whatever it happens to be. So that we have something in writing that says that the seller allows the buyer to go in and do that work. All right, so if seller agrees to all buyer's requests, that's great, I guess. Or you can do part of them like we showed up here and things. But there's a couple of things on here. We want the buyer to remove the investigation of the property contingency, if possible. And we want to ask for that all the time. We want that all the time because they went in, they did their investigations, they had an appraisal done, they had a professional home inspection done, And so all of those investigations have been done. And so if that's the case, let's remove that as a contingency. And if we remove that as a contingency, then we don't have to worry about things continuing to come up. And maybe there's an exception. It says except the following. So maybe we got all of our inspections done and everything else, but we haven't been able to get a roofer out there yet. So we can check this box that said, I'll remove all the investigations except for the roofer. And you can do them individually. You can separate them out that way.
Terry,
Yes.
I have a question right here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Above where it says, you know, they either will credit them or they will, what you said up here, request that seller credit buyer or request that seller modify the purchase price. That one, is that where you would put, because I haven't dealt with this, I've just seen it happen, where you put that, say the house is for sale for $650, but the person needs, I don't know, 10,000 for repairs. And the seller says, okay, I'll give you 10,000, but I'm gonna raise the price to 660. Is that possible? How do they do that? Or do they do that?
They couldn't renegotiate that. They wouldn't do that here.
Okay.
This is a buyer's request for repairs.
Uh-huh.
And so the buyer is just asking the seller to modify the purchase price to take in the amount of the repairs.
But you wouldn't put like a higher price here because of
No.
it. Where would that go then? An amendment then?
Yeah, that would go on an amendment.
Okay. All right, thank you.
It's a good question.
Thanks.
Okay, so here we are, buyers still asking for all these things, now they have, the expiration date is 5 o'clock on the third day. It says that on most of our things, so 3 days afterwards, the seller should respond. Now, you used to have to respond on a separate paper, separate form called a RRR. I don't know how many R's were in there, 4 or 5. But it was a response to requests for repairs. And now it's actually been incorporated into this. Okay, so the buyer signs off on all of these things or whichever ones apply. Now the seller can respond. And as I said before, I always encourage, even though it says at the very top of the form that the seller's not required to respond, it's a nice idea to just clean up everything in everybody's mind, right? Even if the seller's not gonna take care of anything. At least I can check this box and have the seller sign it. And then if I ever ended up in arbitration or mediation or court, and they said, well, this and this and this and this, and I can say, yes, but the buyer asked for it, the seller said no. It's not just like it was out there in space and nobody ever talked about it or anything. There was a request, the seller said no. So as opposed to doing the seller's not required to respond, I would highly recommend that you drop to this point on the response and just say, I'm not doing any of those things. I'm not changing the price. I'm not giving you extra credit. I'm not repairing anything. So I'm not agreeing to any of the buyer requests. But at least now everybody knows. There's no question. All right, let's back it up here then. I can agree to all of their requests, or I can only agree to some of them. Notice the way this is written. It says that they agree to all the requests except. And so don't change that around when you're writing it out there and put down that the ones that they're going to do, because that confuses the issue and it's not accurate. And so make sure that you understand that it's, I'm gonna fix all those things you asked for, except this and this and this, and you put those things in. Or I agree to credit $500 or $5,000 or $1,500 or whatever. Or the seller agrees to modify the purchase price Which then, as Lydia brought up, if that was changed, that would then go to an amendment. Because escrow does not see a request for repairs. This is the negotiation on paper in writing that we're supposed to be doing on contracts. And so this is where it's in writing. They asked for this, I'm not gonna do that, but I will do this. And so that's the negotiation, it's in writing, step by step. And if somebody agrees to revise the purchase price, then we pull up the amendment, which we have an amendment here in just a second, I think. That we go to the amendment and we say, purchase price to be such and such, whatever the number happens to be that we negotiate. And we put that in there. And notice that again, it says seller's agreement only applies if buyer removes those contingencies identified. So I want contingencies removed if we're going to do that. And then the expiration of the offer, same kind of thing. And seller signs it. So now the buyer has requested up here and they signed it. And then the seller signs down here with their negotiation or full agreement to take care of it if they want to. And then it goes back to the buyer and the buyer says, okay, we accept the seller's partial agreement or we don't accept it at all and we're going to give you a new one. That's why at the top of these repair requests, it always has this little place for a number. See there, request number 1. All right, so it leaves you that opportunity to say, well, if you're not gonna take care of any of those things, then how about at least taking care of these things? And you can come up with a second request entirely. So the buyer then signs it and we move forward either with a second request or we have acknowledgement of this and we're gonna move forward. So I hope that makes sense to you a little bit. Notice here an amendment to existing agreement terms. And this is a couple of the amendments that can be put in place. This is an amendment number 1. And of course, it has all the address information and everything. And I didn't refer to the repair request exactly. I didn't put a number in there. But if we had agreed to a different purchase price based on that, like that question that Lydia had a couple minutes ago. If we had agreed to a different purchase price, then we go to this, we do an amendment. An amendment becomes part of the contract, all right? That's the difference between the request for repairs, which doesn't really go to escrow. So escrow doesn't pay any bills, they don't change anything based on that. They do it based on an amendment. So you do the amendment that says based on a recent appraisal, buyer request purchase price to be reduced to this, or you would put on there based on the request for repairs, seller agrees to pay X amount of dollars or reduce the purchase price by X amount of dollars. And then it actually becomes something that's in the contract that escrow can handle. Think that makes sense. Okay. Last but not least, verification of property condition. So this is the final walkthrough. It's got a longer name on it than that, of course. Verification of property condition. But notice the very first couple of sentences, but the first sentence on here, it says the purpose of this inspection is to satisfy buyer regarding the condition of the property. And here, it kind of re-identifies that a little bit. Buyer acknowledges that property is in substantially the same condition as of the date that we wrote the offer and had it all agreed to and everything else. This is what I agreed, this is what I wrote an offer on, and this is what everybody agreed to. And that the seller has completed any repairs, alterations, replacements, or modifications as agreed. Now, how was it agreed? Well, it was agreed in the repair request, right? That I'm going to take care of this, but I'm not going to take care of that, or I'm not going to take care of anything, but at least it's an as agreement at this time. And if I have agreed to take care of some things, this gives the buyer one last chance to go out and see if I did those things. I was supposed to strap the water heater. Did I do that? Yes. I was supposed to put in a carbon monoxide detector. Did I do that? Yes. Did I replace the broken window in the second bedroom? Yes. And so it goes through and it talks about those kind of things in your agreements, not here. Here, if you notice, it reverses that sentence again, just like it did on the last form. And that is that all those things were completed with the following exceptions. So you didn't repair the bedroom window. And so that's what you would write in here. This doesn't become a new wish list for things that you wish you had seen the first time around. However, that being said, if there's some additional damage that's been done that did not exist in substantially the same condition as when you bought it, right? I've seen things like door jam door jams broken. You know what a door jam is, and it's been broken because somebody was trying to move a couch out when they moved and they ran the leg of the couch into the door jam and broke it or something. I've seen windows crack that weren't cracked before and things. So if you see other things, and it's going to be things that, for instance, that are very obvious or things that a home inspector didn't come up with, because hopefully if you had a good home inspection, they came up with things like broken, cracked windows, whatever it happens to be, doors that don't close the way they're supposed to, garage doors that are off their runners, different things like that. Those things are all gonna be come up with, they're all gonna be asked for in a repair request, they'll all be agreed to or not agreed to. And if they're not agreed to be taken care of, then don't add them to this list. This isn't a time to build a new list. It is a time to verify, that's why it's called verification, as opposed to just final walkthrough. It's a verification that you are buying the house that you thought you were buying. With or without repairs, with or without price adjustments, but this is the house that I thought I was buying. And it should be done a few days prior to close of escrow. Don't wait until the same day that you give them the keys, because if that happens and they get in there and they say, oh yeah, well, Terry just, he had me sign this and then I thought I was signing it just to get the keys. And they don't really know, and they don't really know what it was for. So let's wrap this up real quick because I think we can take care of it all. Notice on here that I have these repairs and reports and certifications and things, all starting at about day 18. Now that could be earlier if the other inspections are done earlier and things. But I don't want my seller, if I'm representing a seller, I don't want them to have to spend a whole lot of money prior to knowing that all of the contingency times have been removed. Right? That's why it's day 18 instead of day 14 or something. Could I have the termite repairs done earlier? Of course. However, just understand that if that deal falls apart for some reason or another, now it's the seller's responsibility to pay that money to the termite people, and so they might have money out of pocket, which is no big deal. They were probably gonna have to have it done anyway, but the point is that I wanna make sure that it's done. Now, if we're working a 30 or 45 day escrow, day 18 is plenty of time to get termite work done or septic certs or things like that taken care of. But so don't wait too long after that. But also don't start spending too much of the seller's money until you know that they're gonna be able to pay it out of escrow. All right, we already talked about the funds and the CD being sent out and the loan ready for signing when we talked about the loan. Once all that's done, your last bit of responsibility as an agent is going to be to turn over keys, one way or the other. Make sure that they're ready. Don't make people scramble around or something. Sometimes we don't get a confirmation of closing until 5 or 6 at night. And 5 or 6 at night comes and your buyer calls you and says, or you call the buyer and then telling it closed, and they're going, oh, good, can we get the keys so we can start moving in first thing in the morning? And you're scrambling around trying to figure out where the keys are. and you're calling the other agent, the agent happens to be in a movie. So you can't get a hold of them, and now you don't know what to do, and I've got the keys at the office, or whatever it happens to be. If you're on the seller's side, what I like to do is I like to leave a lockbox on the front door with the key in it, the one that's been in there the whole time. And then I have them leave all of their remotes and their other keys in one of the drawers in the kitchen. And that way, all the other agent has to do is get them into the house. And all the other keys and remotes and all those things are already there. So make sure that you get those all ready so that you're not scrambling around. Make sure that you have your sky slope complete, either on your own or a TC, if the TC is doing the work. And you should be done, and then you'll get a check. How fun is that? All right, so I know we covered a lot today, and I know that there was some of it that was overlap with what we covered last week, because we covered the countdown to closing and the life of an escrow. And now this time we did the life of a loan and how it's impacted. So I hope those two things kind of go together to make you see all the things that have to happen after a property goes into escrow, after an offer is accepted by all parties involved. And if you follow these checklists, or at least review them occasionally, are they going to change? Probably. I told you that to start out with. And I wrote it down here just so you didn't come back. This is a disclaimer. This is Terry's disclaimer. The times and circumstances often change during the course of a transaction. One of our many responsibilities is to make sure that the correct or the contract dates are met or amended. This list is a guide, not a guarantee. Keep everyone in the loop. All right, so these days that I put in here and things, like I said, they aren't guarantees. Sometimes things need to be done to a house. Sometimes things pop up later. You do a transfer disclosure statement and you're avid and everything worked, and now all of a sudden you get a call saying, you know what, our air conditioner isn't working anymore. What should we do about that? Well, fix it. Right, that's the seller's responsibility. The other thing is that we would like it fixed by a licensed person so we can give an invoice to the other side that shows that it's been repaired and things. So things like that happen. It does change things sometimes, but keep everyone in the loop. And the best way to keep everyone in the loop is always in writing. You know, it's kind of one of those things that we've said for our entire careers and things, is if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. And that's kind of true. So, are there any questions before we go bye-bye and go to work?
Yeah, Terry, I got one.
Yeah, go.
It was based on what Lydia said.
Yes.
Is that legal to raise the price if they find out there's repairs that are needed, like the 650 going up to 660? Is that ethical to do that? Because they're already selling the house for 650, right? And they're in contract, and now he wants more money for repairs that are on kind of on his side if they don't work it out as a buyer seller.
It's certainly legal, and how ethical it is kind of depends on the situation. If somebody did a really low ball price, for instance, on a house because they knew it needed, the seller, for instance, priced it really low because they knew it needed some repairs, and your disclosures all reflected that, and then somebody comes in and says, well, yeah, we want the house, but we want all these things done. All these things that you marked the price down for in the first place, now they want done at that lower price. And so, yes, you can negotiate it up or down either way, as long as everyone agrees. And as far as the ethical part goes hand in hand with what I just said, and that is that if we marked the price down because it had all these issues and the owner knew it, and it was reflected in all of our PDSs and SPQs and everything else, then indeed.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for.
You're welcome. Thanks for the question, Chris.
Yeah.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, looks like we're good to go to work. Everybody have a good week. I don't know, let's see.
Thanks, Terry.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. Thanks for attending.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Terry.
You're welcome. See some of you tomorrow. I think tomorrow we have a foundations class, but I don't remember which one, so
Thank you, Terry.
you're welcome. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, Terry. Appreciate it.